you all spent the first kind of year getting comfortable with population employment projections. We're not going to revisit that. They are what they are at this point. Just recognize that if you feel like, oh, maybe we've assumed too much growth or not enough growth, that's why you update this plan every 5 years. So we've got a pretty good set that's been well vetted with the communities. So we took those numbers and you all came up with that preferred growth strategy, and that's what's been fed into the travel demand model. We've also done the preliminary financial resource analysis, and we're still kind of going through that process to get comfortable with those numbers so that we can come back to you in May and say, okay, these are the projects you want to move forward with. Well, these are the different funding options we have, and try to get creative on that. So where we are right now is really that third box down, which is the transportation needs and options. And again, we've got the preliminary travel demand forecast, which says, you know, this is likely where you're going to see congestion problems in the future across the network. And so today is about presenting that, talking to you about some of the existing projects that have already been identified, confirming those, and coming up with some new strategies. We'll come back to you again by the end of May and early June to say, okay, these are the priorities you talked to us about. We've run the model. This is how it's now performing. Now let's talk about how we afford some of this stuff. And then ultimately, we'll come back to you guys in late summer and early fall to get to that cost feasible plan. Real quickly, this is going to be a lot of words, and I apologize, but I think it's important that as you start to think about transportation priorities, that you're always nesting those in a set of goals. And the draft goals are attempting to address both local issues, but also recognizing that it is the MPO's charge to deal with regional mobility. So how do you balance those two things? It's got to be compliant with the state and federal requirements, and it really is about having a set of goals that helps guide the prioritization process and priorities for the future in transportation. So goal number one, again, we're looking at a multimodal system that addresses local and regional connectivity. We're going to look at, you know, how do we reduce congestion and improve accessibility? How do we actually implement more transit and transportation choice? We have to think about things like freight and goods movement. You know, it isn't just about the people moving around in their cars, it's how goods get to and from locations. And then bicycle and pedestrian facilities. The second goal is about safety and security, and this is really getting at the heart of the issue of, you know, we want to make sure that this plan includes recognition and understanding of, you know, are there some safety issues out there with corridors? How do we reduce crashes? You know, what are the different strategies we can do there? Specifically, if we're going to start having a lot more bicycle and pedestrian facilities out there, what do we need to be paying attention to ensure the safety of those? Hurricane evacuation is just another kind of standard goal that we always include because we live in the state of Florida. Preserving and enhancing the existing network. I think TJ laid it out very well in that, you know, there's been a big road building boom in the state of Florida, and the question is, how many more roads are we going to build? Well, if we don't build too many more roads, what are we going to do with our existing network to make it optimal in terms of improving it and making it function well over time? That gets into the constrained corridors. You all have already said there are certain corridors in this area we don't want to widen past 6 lanes, or we don't want to widen this road past 2 lanes. Well, that's a policy direction that you've already said makes sense. So that gets into how you start to address issues, because you've already said, hey, we're not going to deal with that problem through a widening, we're going to do something different. We're going to look at how do we preserve some of those regional mobility corridors. While there is a lot more, I think, shifting of jobs up to this region, Orlando is still a big generator in terms of where people are trying to get to, so you want to keep those regional connections strong. We're going to look at maintenance and operations, and then looking at the integration, again, of the land use and transportation. You know, how do you optimize the two? Fourth goal is about livability and sustainability. And this is getting into issues that we're having to deal with at a state level as well at a regional level, which is about greenhouse gas emission reduction strategies, looking at how do we actually manage that over time. And that's something that we tie to things called VMT, vehicle miles traveled. So we're going to look at those sorts of things. The other big thing, though, is that there's been a lot of visioning done here. Our community, our future is a good example, but also the how shall we grow, the 4 C's. How do we focus on the regional growth strategy of corridors, countryside, conservation? We're going to make sure that gets into this plan. We also have to deal with transportation disadvantage. You know, those folks that may not have a car, how do they get around? How do they get to their doctors? Those sorts of things. And then obviously the community preservation and social fabric, you know, when you put a transportation facility in, how does that actually enhance those things versus detract from them? Goal 5, this is really about economic development. We want to make sure that the transportation investments are actually tied to some job creation and access. We want to do as much as possible to think about balancing the jobs to housing. You know, the more jobs that are based up here, the less you've got to travel south or travel to the west or the east. Looking at the existing centers, you know, this whole idea of centers is about kind of creating these mixed-use areas so that you don't have to travel long distances to go to work, to go to the grocery store, those sorts of things. And then another piece here is just connecting some of the ecotourism economic development benefits with the trail system. So that was a lot of goals, and it's just words at this point, but it's an important framework as you're thinking about how we're going to identify priorities. So the goal summary, again, is just this framework so that as we think about where we want to spend our transportation dollars, think about these goals in the back of your mind. So the transportation needs, again, what this is a long-range lookout as to what are the needs going to be in the future. Which of these corridors do we expect are going to have problems based on those population employment projections? And this is everything after your current TIP. So just get that in your head. We're not going to talk anything today about your current program, the 5-year work program, if you will. This is beyond this. So that's 2014 to 2035. And what we're trying to establish is what's really needed given the desired growth patterns. If you look at those projections, where are people wanting to live and where are the jobs going to be, and how do we connect those dots in terms of a transportation network? One of the things we're going to also look at is how does this match up with your last plan? Hopefully, again, what you're seeing on some of these maps are things that you all already knew about. You know, some of these corridors you know have been problems in the past, you know they're going to be problems in the future. And because of that, we're going to be presenting today, there's going to, one of the maps shows existing project priorities. And these are projects that either came out of the last plan or have come up in recent conversations. The question is, are these still the priorities we want to move forward with, or are there new priorities and new things we should be looking at? And again, looking at additional strategies. So if we see a corridor and it's showing red, which think of red and purple as bad today because that's what it means on these maps, what sort of strategies make sense? Is it a widening project or is it something totally different? Is it a combination of transit investments, bike ped investments, and actually playing with some land use? That's what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to turn this over to Nick Lepp in just a moment, but I wanted to give you kind of a real broad overview of what the preliminary analysis from the model is telling us about transportation in the region. And the big thing is that total vehicle miles traveled per person actually reduces a little bit by 2035. That's a pretty good thing, believe it or not. You don't hear transportation planners say many good things, but this is a good thing because what it's telling us is that people aren't actually having to drive as far and travel quite as much to get to places. And that has a lot to do with the fact that there is more destinations locally, meaning there's more grocery stores located closer to residential places. There's more jobs up here. So you're seeing a little bit better balance, and because of that, the VMT per person actually reduces by 2035. The problem is congestion actually goes through the roof. If you think about it, congestion is jumping to 45% of all the roadways by 2035 if we do no improvements. Now, meaning we know we're going to do some improvements, but if we do nothing, they're going to be congested. So that's really what we're dealing with, and that's what we've got to tackle. The existing roadways really just, existing roadways and existing commitments through 2014 just can't support that future growth. That shouldn't be news to anybody, but that's the condition we're dealing with. So with that, Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you to get into a little